All right. Well, we are live. Hello there. Welcome to the Deadly Analysis School of Dance. I am your host, Madam Noah Adam. And tonight I am joined by our lead dancer, Miss Benjamin Wormwood, and Madam Jim Jiminy, Jim Jiminy, Jim Jim Giroux. I think that's his whole name. Did I get that right? Yes, it is. So those names took me like 7 hours to think of, by the way. It's my whole day. So tonight we are going to be discussing Suspiria. Finally, Suspiria, both the 1977 Dario Argento film and the 2018 remake by Luca Guadagnino. And much like we did our Halloween, then versus now podcast, I sort of want to place a slightly heavier emphasis on the more recent 2018 film because I think it's, in my opinion, I think a little better built for more modern audiences. It certainly doesn't mean that it's a better movie overall than the original 1977 film, but it has less of a, giallo, over the top Italian style horror thriller vibe going on compared to the original. In fact, in a lot of ways, the more recent 2018 remake is sort of the inverse. At least I would argue that. I'll maybe make some arguments for that later on. But, it's always tricky to compare remakes. But to add a 40-year gap and then also what I would consider to be a somewhat significant difference in style of film, it's even a little bit trickier. But we'll do our best. We'll give it the old Susie Bannion try, right? And before we hop into the films, I want to start with this because I don't know where I'm going to throw this in or smuggle this in once we start our conversation. But I had a dream like a week ago. I had a nightmare about this movie, and I posted this on our Deadly Analysis Facebook page, so Ben knows about this, but I don't think Jim does. So I had this dream like a week ago where the witches in this movie, the 2018 movie specifically, were like hunting me down. They were coming after me. They were chasing me down, trying to like slice off let's just say a significant part of my bodily apparatus, an appendage of sorts. Like they needed it for some spell, right? And so they were chasing me down like this winding German road, like a bunch of witches cackling in a car. And I shit you not, guess what kind of car they were all driving while they were coming after me? A Volkswagen. And that is not a joke. I am not smart enough to make a joke like that. Like that was my brain crossing wires or something when I was sleeping with the idea of like Volk and Volkswagen, or who the fuck knows. Anyway, no idea how to segue out of that. I thought that was interesting. I don't know where I could possibly throw that into in this movie. There's no way to segue. So I thought I'd start by saying that. Actually, you know what? There is a way to segue. There is. Let's just say both of these films, especially the original, have a dreamlike quality to them. See what I did there? All right, this is getting out of hand. So from this point on, spoilers, as always. Like I kind of just gave you a whole bunch of spoilers, like the fact that there's witches, in case you haven't seen these movies. So the original 77 Suspiria tells the story of Susie, played by Jessica Harper, who travels to Germany to attend a ballet school. And when she arrives late on a stormy night, no one lets her in. And during this ordeal, she sees another student named Pat fleeing from the school. And when Pat reaches her apartment, she's murdered, right? So the next day, Susie is admitted to her new school, but she has a difficult time settling in. She hears noises. She often feels sick. And as more people begin to die, Susie uncovers the terrifying secret of the history surrounding the school. And that is, drumroll please, there was no drumroll, I don't know why I said that the school is being run by witches, right? And I had the same theory about the administrators of my middle school back in the day, but that's a different story for a different time. Now, in the 2018 version of this movie, it's a little different, right? So here we see a young American dancer, Susie Bannion, arrive in 1970s Berlin to audition for the world-renowned Helena Marcos dance company, right? And when she vaults to the role of lead dancer, the woman she replaces breaks down and accuses the company's female directors of witchcraft, right? Meanwhile, there's this other side story about this very inquisitive psychotherapist, as well as another member of the dance academy, who together uncover dark and sinister secrets as they probe the depths of the studio's hidden underground chambers. And spoiler alert, more witches. And super ultimate spoiler, Susie Bannion, right, that young American girl from Ohio coming to the dance academy, is actually an ancient immortal witch named Mother Susperiorum, who has come to take over the school. A lot going on here. Just a ton of shit happening. So before I give before we hop into everyone's thoughts, I want to do something kind of unique. I want to know from Jim and Ben which of these two films you enjoyed more. And I want to do this in the spirit of Suspiria. So let's vote kind of like they did in the remake. And the way I want to do this, let's call the original 1977 Argento film, let's call that Helena Marcos. right? And let's call the newer 2018 version Madame Blanc, right? So now let's vote like the witches. Only 3 of us, so it'll be interesting to see if we end kind of an odd number here. Be careful how you answer, because as we saw in the movie, if you answer incorrectly, your head explodes. So this is important, how you vote here. Okay, so Helena Marcos, older 1977 Argento film you enjoyed more. Madame Blanc, newer film. Ben.
Blanc. I think
Jim.
it's easy for me.
Blanc.
Blanc. None of our heads are going to explode. I am also Madame Blanc. This is wow. I have a sneaking suspicion we may shit on nostalgia here, folks.
Yeah. I think that's no contest. I think it's no contest that the Luca Guadagnino film is superior.
Well, let's go. Why? Like, let's
sure.
start it off by why. What, Jim? Why did you think the recent one was better?
Well, first of all, I think there's a modernization of the effect there's the effect of the modernization of the visual effects and the visual style in Luca Guadagnino's work. He certainly had more of a budget to work with, and he had more visual effect. He was able to, with the technology of today, more viscerally render some of the violence that goes on in this film. I also think that it focuses a lot more on the relationships between women, the women in the dance troupe. I think there's more of there's almost a more streamlined plot to the remake version. All of it worked for me in a lot. Like every element of the film worked for me more in the 2018 version than in the 77 version. I think part of that has to do with the modernization, but I also think it has a lot to do with the stories that these two filmmakers were trying to tell. I think the 77 version is certainly a product of its time because it's got all of the horror film tropes that we see in, for example, Halloween coming out in 78, Final Girl, people acting stupidly and getting killed as a result, and those activities, those sort of horror movie tropes, is something that the genre has evolved beyond, and I think that and rightly so, because those original horror film tropes were tired even then, I think. And they were relying upon shock value and relying upon extraordinary violence to shock the audience rather than something more cognitive and thus more visceral. I think that the path to the viscera is through the brain in modern horror films, and the path to the viscera in the classic horror films is just a scary image or a girl thrashing around in barbed wire, which was almost a laughable scene from 2019 eyes, as I watched it earlier today. So yeah, I think that because the genre has evolved, because the film focuses more on its characters, and because of the budget and the visual effects that Guadagnino had at his disposal, 2018 is clearly the superior film. What about you, Ben? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, all those things I think are definitely valid reasons why the remake in this particular case is better. Whenever I was watching the 77 version, and this isn't necessarily true of all movies from the 70s or even 80s that I see, I just felt like it was fucking cheesy. You know what I mean? Like, I don't necessarily know if that's just because of the effects. I think that definitely has a part of it, but I think that the choices of violence were poor. In the newer version, I get the feeling that, you know, the scenes where we do use violence, and it is pretty violent in some scenes, it's tied into more of a kind of like a hint of sort of like what's going on in the background and in the story and in the plot. It serves as a plot development device. For instance, the use of the dance scene to show the contortion of I forget her name, but the other girl who was in the room underneath, right? So it's like that's really super interesting. Some dude busting in a window and stabbing somebody, like that's boring. You know what I mean? It's like it's almost more like a slasher film at that point than there's something more going on here. So just, yeah, like in general, I think the choices of violence were in the newer one just more of like plot devices compared to the old one where they just seemed like gratuitous violence. The use of music was totally different. So yes, we have scenes throughout both movies where they use this sort of like folk dance, like super creepy song. But in the older one, like it just seemed like randomly thrown in. For instance, the beginning scene, this movie lost me immediately just because of how poorly they executed this. But like she's walking through the hallway, and sometimes the music is there, and sometimes it's not, and it's not clear that there's sort of like a perspective shift going on or any kind of like reason why they would need to use that technique. It's just sort of thrown in, and it's really just not believable. It loses me. It doesn't creep me out. It doesn't set the tone for me. But whenever I hear the use of music in the newer one, it definitely does that. Like it really kind of gets under my skin. I just think the direction and like the editing, I guess, or whatever you would call it, like whatever choices went into that combination of visual and music were just much better in the newer version. Yeah, and I feel like I could just go on and on. There's just so many examples where it was just a better put together, more interesting piece of work.
Yeah, and to build on that, I think you're absolutely right, Ben. To build on that, though, is there's some just obviously bad acting and blocking decisions in the 77 version. And that has to do with, like a character says, tell me what's going on. Okay, fine. If you're not going to tell me, just calm down anyway. And I think I'm quoting verbatim a literal line. And there's no reaction shot in between that. There's no like sign that the character had pursued her objective, wasn't able to get what she wanted, and then backed off anyway. So it was just these lines on a page that were read to us rather than characters, fully realized characters that are expressing themselves and trying to get things out of their scene partners. It was just on a basic scene and editing level, the 77 version didn't work in multiple scenes, whereas it's almost eye roll worthy. I think you're absolutely right when you're kind of pointing out that it's cheesy. As a counterpoint, though, just to kind of, I'm sure the 77 version has a 7.5 on IMDb. So like this film has its fans. And so as a counterpoint, I would suspect that reviewing this film in context and with 1977 eyes, we may come to different conclusions. That's not, but still, I'm still struggling to see where those people say that this film still holds up, though.
The distinction is going to be, I think, between those who value, I mean, and I don't see how you couldn't value this more, but the narrative sort of underlying place the film is taking you, logic, maybe, right? It's really like a distinction between logic and narrative versus atmosphere and shock and color and vibe, right? There is in the 77 version almost a purposeful disregard of logic and narration. I mean, you guys have both described two that I already have in my notes. The biggest being what Ben mentioned, where sound, music especially. I literally was sitting right here. I was watching it on my CRT, which has fucking booming colors compared to an LCD. Like I have a Sony XBR. Like this is for like color correction, right? So color pops like you would not believe on this. So when I watched the 77, I was like blown away by the color, but then there would be sequences when the music would play as though something horrific was about to happen and then stop and there's nothing happening. And I was just super confused. I was like, and I sat right here behind me and I remember going, what the fuck is happening? Like I said it out loud. I rarely say it out loud. I was like, what is going on? I don't understand. I think we could look at this one of two ways. We could say, hey, we just don't understand the 1977 Italian style giallo sort of comes from the Yellow Book sort of novel, or they're not really novels, they're sort of short stories. Like we don't get that sort of style, right? Whereas a lot of people were embedded into that style. They love that style, right? Typically as a female lead, it's got a mystery to it. In this case, it had a supernatural mystery to it. So it's more of an expression of, say, art house, artsy style stuff in, and then on the other side is narration, logic, making sense. I feel like this is one of the more distinct examples where there's a a fight between those two things, and you see that explicitly in the distinction between these two movies. And I couldn't help, just like you guys, but vote for Madame Blanc. I couldn't help but feel like the later one, although I have my complaints about the later one, Jesus Christ, was it too long. My understanding was they were going to make it into two movies. They were going to have a part one and a part two. I'm so glad they didn't do that. But at least that film, I mean, there was more mystery and more push, more organic exposition in that movie that sort of made it more palpable, made it more digestible for me, rather. So I get what you're saying, but could someone like return to all three of us and say, well, this is a product of, like Jim put this as almost like an evolution of film. Like we've gotten better at these things. The right. Second film has gotten better. So instead of looking at as an evolution where things get hierarchically better, could we look at it as maybe just a vastly different film style that we are not used to?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was trying to get at when I was talking about trying to view these films in context. I think Argento's film would probably be seen as a giant step forward in the genre in 1977. I mean, this was even before. Let me double check myself. I'm almost positive. Yes, this is a year before Halloween came out, John Carpenter's film, and you can see similar stylistic choices being done in the 78 Halloween as in the 77 Argento film. So I can imagine a film scholar, which I sometimes, consider myself to be, looking at this and saying, no, actually, considering everything that came before, 77 audiences would have been shocked by the use of color, the graphicness of the violence, almost the gratuitousness of the violence, and even the tropes of the final girl and the highlight of a female protagonist. I can imagine audiences in 77 considering this to be a giant step forward. However, from 2019 eyes, does that film hold up? I don't think it does. But I am sympathetic to the point that we should sort of review these in context and think about what a 77 audience would have thought. In that sense, yes, he's doing a lot with a little. He's able to create a relatively creepy environment with nothing but some creepy music and differences in oversaturated light. He's able to include some really disturbing scenes of violence with very few makeup effects, probably just a bottle of ketchup and having a dog eat at some a side of beefsteak for a little while. So there's he's able to do a lot with a little, and in that sense I tip my cap to him, even though as a whole I don't think the film worked for me.
So one way that I would push back on that, well, a couple ways. So I've seen a fair number, I think, of international horror films. So whenever I think of seeing a movie that's not quite like something that I would particularly be used to, maybe I think of something actually like Climax, filmed in a very small space overall. A lot of really long shots, not a lot of crazy graphics. Dance, right? Not a typical plot development. Very deeply existential and very, I think, indicative of like what you typically see of French horror, which is quite a bit different than what we see, which has a striking lack of violence, I think, in most cases, and it's more about sort of like that cosmic dread. I can also think of like Latin American horror films or Irish horror films or Japanese or Nordic. And I still think in the context of maybe like something that I've not been used to in the past and maybe is a particularly new way to do certain things, I think I'm fairly malleable to that. I still don't find myself like able to contextualize this into a place where I think it's super good. And we're still just talking about the 77 version, of course. I also want to call to record that we have done the Phantom Carriage on this show, and we've also done the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And I feel like the effects and maybe Caligari in both, like, and also in the Phantom Carriage, like for the time periods in which they were filmed were quite advanced, but in 2019 it's nothing, right? It's quite silly. And watching a silent film, I think, is sort of the ultimate removal of what you would be typically used to in 2019 as well. But I thought both of those were fantastic, and it had more to do with just plot. I think points, not necessarily like plot points or plot development. How do I say this? It's just like a more interesting story. Like
Yeah.
for whatever reason, it just weaves together quite well. You know what I mean? And the 1977 Suspiria, I just don't think it meshes together. It's like they're trying to weave a blanket, but there's gaps and there's different kinds of fabric and there's different colors of fabric all mismatched together, and you don't get this like cohesive whole that makes sense when you look at it. You know? I don't know. Like that's the best way that I can think to put it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm sort of putting myself in a position where I have to argue for a point of view that I don't necessarily hold. I agree with you that this film didn't work for me. I agree with you that it's cheesy, although I am trying to kind of put myself in the position of the film's defenders. I just want to make sure that at the outset of this podcast, we're not doing something equivalent to watching the Phantom Carriage and saying, why isn't there sound here? So that's kind of where
that would be great. I wish we would have opened our Phantom Carriage podcast that way. That would have been amazing. Wait a minute. There's no sound. Who thought of this? You know, sorry.
This is awful.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't think we're doing that. I totally agree with Ben. I was part of both of those podcasts, and there was like we didn't have anything to say through 2018. We did it in like 2018, 2017. God, we've done this podcast for a while. We didn't look through goggles such that we were like, oh, that was terribly done. Like it's a different age now. We understood sort of the I don't say the film style, but just the techniques and the limits that they had back then to film, and appreciated it from that perspective. But I think the criticisms we've just sort of launched into initially with the 77 piece are apt criticisms. I mean, it's problems with the narrative, it's problems with the story, it's problems with logic. There's issues that just make it difficult, I think, even for audiences back then to follow. That said, as a commenter pointed out, this is meant to be very stylistic and also experimental. And I think maybe we should look at it in that context too. That it was meant to produce more of a mood more than a cohesive narrative, like a nightmare. If you think of a nightmare, typically a nightmare you have, I just got done talking about how witches were coming after my scrotum, right? Like that's not, there's no real deep narrative there. It's just a bunch of cackling women in a Volkswagen coming after me, right? Like there's color and there's mood and there's fear, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And in some ways, the older film has that sort of thing. It amplifies horror through sound and through red and green. I mean, it is, hey, not just that. Now that I think about it, in the original, there's other artistic issues, like, not issues, actually things that are unique. So for example, if you notice in Argento's version, almost every ceiling in every room is super high. Like there's really oddly shaped walls. And in fact, was it, the cabinet of Dr. Caligari, Ben, where like there was like very odd, yeah, it was the cabinet of Caligari where there's odd infrastructure, lots of arches in Caligari. And there's a lot of arches in this movie too. A lot of just really unnatural qualities, I guess we would say. Doors that don't typically look like normal doors, even arches that are bent sideways in Argento's piece, just very different. And that really, I think, pushes the idea that it's all about atmosphere and style and about sort of being involved in a vibrant nightmare, as opposed to, like, that is so obviously first in Argento's piece that maybe we could criticize ourselves for even remotely trying to look into narrative as an integral component to the film. But then the other part of me is like, well, okay, shouldn't all films have something like that in there? So I don't know. I'm not sure how to really think about this.
Yeah, I mean, not all films. There are certainly films that are all about, I mean, I think of some of Terrence Malick's work, which is all about creating a mood and a feeling. And that those films don't work for me either. At a certain point, it does come down to taste. And, you know, I did mention some of the the lights and colors and music and how it all works as it works to achieve that mood. And I think that's fair, and that's about where the experiment succeeds.
Mhm.
And in terms of plot narrative, that's where the experiment fails. So if we're going to call it experimental, that's fine. An experimental film is not a blanket. It is not a blanket license to do whatever the fuck you want and just call it art.
Yeah, that's a good point.
After a certain point, your experiment has failed, and there are elements of this experiment that succeeds and moved the conversation about horror film as a genre forward, and then there are elements of this experiment that didn't work. And that's so I give it props where props are due, but all of the things we are saying are still valid criticisms. So I'm going to stop putting myself in the shoes of arguments that I don't agree with, and then we'll move on from there.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'll give to the 2018 version is just the world building is obviously vastly superior, but I think it's because the 2018 version attempted to build a world. Like the 77 version didn't really do that in any way that was cohesive. So in the 2018 version, we have like Pat's diary, which sort of has notes and details in it about the story, about the three witches, about where we're going in the narrative. Klemperer, his piece in the, I mean, like his entire character in the movie seems to be largely expositional. He pushes the mystery forward. He is an organic expression of the exposition of the movie in a lot of ways. There are flashbacks of Susie Banion's Mennonite mother and the issues of dance and all of this stuff that sort of gives you more of a world to which the setting takes place. Not just to skip the fact that they're right next to the fucking Berlin Wall and the setting is unbelievably important in the 2018 movie, whereas it doesn't seem to be in the original 77. So at the very least, the 2018 version builds a more specific context for sort of the film, the characters to work with, gives you more of a cohesive narrative. But I don't think that, like, I don't want to push that as a positive because the 77 version was so obviously not that way that being like, oh, the 2018 version had a story, like that's not really that's not necessarily like, I don't want to raise the film score because it had a narrative, had a clear narrative in it. Sometimes clear narrative can still mean a shitty narrative. But right. I will give it to this one that it kept my interest, even though it was longer, way longer. It certainly kept my interest more just because I felt like it was leading me somewhere. Whereas the 1977 version was just saturating me with colors. By the way, on the issue of colors, y'all notice, I mean, this was obviously purposeful. In the 2018 version, the colors are very muted. It's the opposite. It's almost a direct inverse. The colors are extremely muted everywhere in the film. Whether it's the clothes of the characters, the building, it's often raining, which I think is an excuse to mute the colors in the movie. That was obviously done purposeful. I don't know if it's an homage, kind of reverse homage to Argento, but it was certainly noticeable because one of the first things you're thinking of if you've seen both movies is obviously 77 is all about Technicolor, color palette, vibrant colors. And it is so the opposite in the 2018 version that I felt like it was purposeful and maybe an homage. I don't know. I haven't read anything about the director talking about that, but it seemed clear to me. It just seemed everywhere in the movie. So.
Yep. So like I would definitely agree that it does seem like exactly the opposite, right? So like I'm thinking of, yes, of course, like that scene where you roll up on this building and it's just this weird, oddly shaped kind of like giant red monolith standing there as you approach. Whereas in this one, that's definitely not the case. It's constantly raining. Everything is gray the entire time. But I think that's actually quite good for the mood even. And like, okay, so like let's say that it's not even about the story, right? So let's think about just the way that both movies build the mood with color. In the first one, I think are oversaturated with bright colors and crazy geometry and stained glass and like weird, interesting shapes. But whenever they're used in the newer version, I do think it stands out more. So whenever you see, for instance, like those crazy patterns that sort of describe the Volk dance that are in a lot of ways quite similar to a lot of the just geometry you see all over the walls and floors in the 77 version, it seems more significant. It seems more interesting because it's not, you're not inundated with it. And even thinking about the endings of the movies. So like for the entire time for the 2018 version, everything is gray and dark. And at the very end, you get the scene that is bathed in red, and it really stands out. And like, it really drives that payoff home. Right. And like, I think a lot of the 2018 movies sort of relies on that long build up to this crazy kind of like mind blowing payoff. Whereas in the 77 version, again, you have all of this color and all of these interesting shapes and this bombardment on your senses the entire time. And then the sort of like the climactic scene is quite anticlimactic. You have the girl rolling, I guess like Susie rolling up on Mother Marcus, and it's dark and you can't see much, and Mother Marcus is obviously there, and like they have this like struggle with between her and her friend and this illusion. And I guess that's sort of interesting, but it still doesn't give you that, that moment, right? Yeah, I don't know. So it's like I think just in the way that they select those things, it just works better in 2018 because it's not all you have. It's like it's placed in there specifically as a highlight among this otherwise very slow, dark, and gray scenery.
Yeah, that's especially true in the dance sequences as well. The climactic dance sequences are all the more beautiful because of the color against the gray background. And whereas the dance sequences in Climax didn't work for me all that well, the dance sequences in this one did, because they were part of the narrative. They were part of the story that was being told, and they were such a in bas relief from the earlier gray scale background that pervaded much of the movie. So I liked the Guadagnino version and its more judicious use of color in the 2018 version. Noah, you also brought up exposition, and that's another great point of comparison between the two. We get our exposition dump in 77 from a psychiatrist who the main character didn't really know he was a psychiatrist, and outside of a building that said Conference of Psychiatry or something along those lines. And in the case of the 2018 version, we get our exposition dump from a character who actually participates in the narrative. And so it undoubtedly that's a change for the better from 77 to 2018. So in its use of color and in its use of exposition, 2018 improves upon the original.
Yeah, there's so many ways we could take this. I mean, so I want to take issue with one thing you said, Jim, which was about the distinction between this movie and Climax. I put some notes in it. So in case you guys are wondering, we did Climax last week. That was our podcast last week, which is also a dance movie. It's a dance horror movie. We've been on a dance horror kick. I feel like we should just scrap Annihilation next week and do Black Swan or something. Just keep this going or something. But yeah, I mean, I actually think Climax, I think the dance portions of Climax, much like Suspiria, were integral to the movie and were heavily based in the narrative was heavily informed by the dancing. So in Climax, think of the degradation over time because of the LSD. Think of how people in that movie got more, there was more vice, right? As time went on, and the music changed. The music got more tribal. The beats got heavier. There were faster beats. I'm thinking of the verses scene where you're getting that godlike top-down perspective, and it's like 8 minutes or something, and everyone's kind of dance battling, right? That's more. It just gets crazier from there. The beats get harder. The music gets harder. To the point where I think in Climax where the power turns off because that kid kills himself. Again, if you haven't seen Climax, I'm sorry. And everything turns red, right? And the music at that point gets exceedingly freaky, and you just see people kind of flailing their limbs around. So I feel like the music in Climax was heavily connected to the story and to the movie and pushed, I think, the degradation of the characters forward. I mean, I think that you were sort of saying that didn't happen. Am I wrong?
Yeah, we're gonna fight about Climax again.
Wait, I know. Let's just do this for weeks in a row. Yeah, let's keep
right. Every podcast from now on out, we're gonna go toe to toe about Climax.
Yeah, but I think Suspiria had that too. I think, in other words, I guess I'm saying both of these movies had them. I actually think Climax. I think Climax did a better job. If the issue is going to be connecting dance to yeah, to the story.
Yeah. So let's do. Maybe I'll just revise so that we can get off of our climax fight again.
So we can get off of our climax.
Yeah, there we go. So we can get off of our climax fight again. I'll revise my point to say that aesthetically speaking, if I'm just watching the dance sequences in Suspiria and the dance sequences in Climax, I think the dance sequences in Suspiria in 2018 are far superior to the ones in Climax. And from an aesthetic point of view, if I'm just watching the dance sequences, I would prefer the ones in Suspiria. I think they're more vibrant. I think they're more technically interesting. I think there's more attention to choreography, and it's less what I would call seizure dancing than Climax.
Oh, see, this is where we can't fight, because now it's chocolate versus vanilla. God damn you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I see what you did there. You
turned it into chocolate versus vanilla so that we can move on to discussions of Suspiria.
You clever bastard. All right.
Yeah. We have to revise the title of the video. Like Suspiria 1977 versus 2018. Also 3 hours of climax.
Okay, well, if I put the YouTube video title also 3 hours of climax, this video is going to go viral just from people wanting to see what happens in the video. Right. Yeah, like this is all right. But on the issue, so we've jumped sort of into dance, right? So dance is obviously we've been on this kick in the podcast last couple weeks with dance. Dance is something, like, when you say the word dance, when you think of dance, I think most people think of something celebratory, maybe something like, I think that's kind of like the first thing that comes to mind, depending on your background, I'll put it that way. But in Suspiria and Climax, it's almost, in both films, I think, Jim, we could sort of agree, there's a sense in which it's almost a cathartic release of something. It is, in Climax, I think, a release of carnality, human carnality and vice. And in Suspiria, it's a projection of power, in the sense that these are really connected to spells. Like, if that's, I mean, we should just get into that. Like, I think there's a certain part in the 2018 Suspiria where Madame LeBlanc says that the dances are really about the space created in between your movements, right? That's sort of the power of the dance. And we think of dance as something that's innately physical. There's an athleticism involved with it. There's a commitment to dancers. When you think of dancers, ballet dancers, there's a deep commitment, almost an obsession. Again, Black Swan. I would think of like the sort of bloody ballerina shoes idea, which I think we've talked about before. There's the idea of like struggling and going through pain through the creative process to create something majestic. And this is heavily involved in Suspiria, the idea of emptying oneself for art's sake, like for the craft, right? And it's interesting that is something that is included in horror. That could be a horror film, right? I think just the idea of emptying oneself for something else is a little scary, but it's interesting that, I mean, what do you guys think about dance and horror just generally? I mean, I would have never guessed when we created this podcast that we'd have at least 2 weeks in a row where we'd be doing horror films that are explicitly and expressively about dancing. That is so weird to me.
I think you're absolutely right, Noah, but I would also add in expression, that dance is not just about celebration or sort of throwing yourself into something. It's having something to say that you can't put into words, you can only move about. And of course, I'm incapable of doing that, of expressing myself that way.
Wait, I told everyone on Twitter that you were going to dance for them last week and this week.
Right.
Like,
I did. I have taken ballet classes, so that might. We'll just see how the podcast goes.
How many beers in? How many beers in is Jim?
Yeah, like a motherfucker. So yeah, it's I want to talk about dance in this movie by talking about dance in another movie, which I hate it when people do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. So fuck it. It's in other podcasts, not in ours. We're awesome always. But the I want to talk about a film called All That Jazz. This was one of Bob Fosse's films. It stars Roy Scheider. If you haven't seen it, it is absolutely fantastic. And there's a moment in this film where two characters do a dance for the Roy Scheider character, and it it was one of those moments when I realized that dance was in itself a language, because this dance is all about sort of understanding the other character, and it's a pure expression of love between these two characters to the Roy Scheider character. It's the everything old will be new again dance. And if you have the after this podcast, look it up on YouTube. It's just delightful. And that's the same type of it was sort of a revelatory moment for me as I was watching that movie, because that was the moment when I started to realize that dance was words for some people, for these characters specifically, and that this was their way of telling them just how they love the Roy Scheider character in All That Jazz. I think that something similar is going on in the 2018 Suspiria, where it's about expressing power over others. It's about expressing a commitment to an idea and to a force that is both ethereal but also really visceral. I think those are the interesting aspects of the dance in Suspiria, and that's at least that's what I got out of it. I don't know, Ben, you haven't talked about dance yet. What do you think?
Trying not to jump over you guys. Yeah, no, like I think I absolutely agree with that, right? And so like I've said this before that plot in a movie is generally very secondary for me. And so like earlier on, whenever I talked about telling a story, I think that definitely includes expressions that are somewhat beyond words. And I think it's definitely possible to tell a story through an interpretive movement. So, whether that's ballet or just pure interpretive dance. And I think it's really interesting how well that seems to work in horror, because there's only so much you can say with words. There's only so much you can say with music. There's also only so much you can say with violence. And I think dance brings just another tool to the toolkit of communications that allows us to explore things that are perhaps otherwise difficult to pin down and characterize. So in Suspiria, I do think it's about an expression of power and of will. In Climax, I do think what they're trying to express is more about that, like definitely about that raw carnality, as you mentioned, but also a sense of pure terror. That one sort of dance scene in the middle where we have Selva, whatever, doing her thing where she's going toward the force. And I think that was like really just like one of my absolute favorite parts in this movie, because it's not just the background expression that's going on, almost like if you were to think about Climax and the main dance hall toward the end of the movie being like flames and these people contorting themselves, it is sort of like a very hellish scene. And sort of that's more like background expression, whereas this in particular was telling the story of the internal state of this particular character and like guiding you through what's going on in her mind and her experiences in a way that does transcend words, transcends music, transcends whatever you can do with the background. It's very interesting. And I also want to pull in Us here, because Us isn't a dance movie, right? It's not a dance movie, but toward the end, you do get that very keen tie-in with the main story being told, where you have this communication through dance theme come up. And whenever Red, I guess, like the one that's actually Red, comes out and is readopted by the parents, she can't talk, she's encouraged to dance, and then that ends up being mirrored through the other version there in the underground. It's just an amazing tie-in there. But it's even better whenever you get to like that final climactic scene where you see them fighting, and Red, the newer, I guess, like whatever, the one in the suit that's actually supposed to be the antagonist, I guess, for most of the movie, is sort of just dancing around these violent attacks and completely evading and winning this struggle because of this sort of like passive shadow like kind of molding to the movements of the aggressor, right? It's like this really interesting way to characterize a very cool struggle, and I think it's symbolic of even internal struggle, right? So yeah, I mean, like there's really interesting ways I think dance can be used in horror in particular, and it is because of that expression of things that can't be expressed through other modes of communication.
That is really interesting to me. I think you guys are totally right. To the extent that dance is an expression of something, I mean, that thing to which it's expressing can be a whole host of things. Well, really, all of the things we've talked about in this podcast that we all find deeply terrifying, which I think is really cool. Someone in the chat brought up, what about the dance in Footloose, which I thought was interesting, which is clearly about rebellion, I think. So it's a good point that it can be an expression of a whole host of different things. So to that extent, of course, it makes sense that it would be in the horror genre. Just not something like on the face of it you would think, like sort of prima facie dance horror does seem to be kind of don't seem to be bedfellows, but they really are. And I think it's come out in a lot of recent horror films, which is interesting. I didn't even think about Us. That's totally true. Really, really wild.
And 3 dance movies in a row, dance horror movies in a row.
Yeah.
I wonder if Annihilation has a dance sequence.
We're gonna need to look for one. I don't know. We could just say the bear was dancing. Well, I don't know.
The Shimmer, is that how that works?
Isn't the Shimmer like an actual dance? I think the Shimmer is an old dance from like the 20s or something. If it is, that's how we're tying it in. That's gonna be my intro. So
right, we're the fourth dance movie in a row, dance horror. And in Footloose, I think it's also about a repression, especially in that warehouse dance where he's, anyway, we'll just be dancing about these movies rather than talking about them eventually.
No, but what's interesting is dancing is a huge part. Like if we've been distinguishing the 77 film from the 2018 film, and dancing is way more prevalent, way more key in the second movie, or in the remake. I'm sorry. It seemed like the remake was about dance. Right, there's so many damn dance sequences in the remake, and there's actually very little in the original.
There's almost none. That was one of my things about I watched the 2018 version first, and then I watched the 77 version. And I'm like, wait, this could be set anywhere. This could be set in a boarding school. This could be set in an acting school. This could be set in a prison. This could be set anywhere. It doesn't matter. Dance has nothing to do with the plot of this movie, and it was rather clear, having spent some time around dancers and ballet dancers in the past, that I would suspect that many of those people who were in the 77 version weren't actually dancers. I'm gonna go out on a limb there. Some of them were, but one of them was doing a dance exercise really wrong. Anyway, let's see, what else did I want to... maybe we could move on to like the portrayal of the supernatural in both of these films.
Right.
I found that interesting as well. I thought that the supernatural in the 77 version was so mysterious that it almost became all-powerful and omniscient until you burned down the dance studio. But in the 2018 version, it seemed like there was more attention to world building, and thus there was more attention to the rules of the supernatural in the 2018 version, which I think that lends more credence to your earlier point, Noah, about how the 2018 version has a logic to it that the 77 version doesn't.
The supernatural in the Argento movie is very otherworldly, and that makes sense considering that the entire film is otherworldly and nightmarish and supposed to damn logic to a large degree. The remake tended to be more rule oriented. Dancing and otherwise. I mean, I think about voting. Like we did this at the beginning, where they're voting for Marcos, they're voting for LeBlanc. There's a hierarchy, a very clear hierarchy, a very real struggle between a couple of the characters, LeBlanc and Marcos, and to a certain extent, Susie Bannon, who we know as Mother Susperiorum. It's more real world, and I think that world building creates a very interesting distinction in sort of the end sequence with death and the sort of supernatural stuff we see. Also in the 2018 film, you get the fact that there are witches early on. It's not really till the end of the original Suspiria where like the cat's out of the bag. Like it's really towards the end Whereas this movie gives it to you fairly quickly that there are witches here, you know. But you can do that if you build a world in which you lead there more clearly, and also if you have like an extra fucking hour to make the movie. So yeah.
Yeah, like I do think that's quite strange how they handle that, man. It's puzzling to me, particularly because we keep talking about Mother Superiorum and whatever, Mother Marcus. But just to explicitly state this movie was supposed to be within a trilogy of two other movies about each of the three mothers, and that's in fact what the trilogy was called, the Three Mothers. And there was even talk that perhaps there would be a fourth movie added to that to kind of like capstone and have all three of them sort of featured. But I really got the impression from the overall story that this was indeed supposed to be about building a world in which these three sort of like ancient, magical people existed and kind of like did their thing. So there was definitely a larger world present, but there really wasn't any effort put into making that apparent, right? And so like I don't want to say that it necessarily has to be all about the story again, but whenever there is a world sort of implied in the larger theme of the scaffolding within which you put this movie, it kind of does a disservice to ignore that entirely. You know what I mean? So it's like you assume that there's going to be witches, it's going to be about witches, depending of course on the chronology of the films and how they were released, but when it's supposed to be kind of like that sort of like core elements around which everything else is built in a trilogy of movies, you think it would be a little bit more at the forefront. Now, I'm definitely going to come out and say that I think it could work if they don't sort of reveal the magical element to the end. I think that's a good idea. That's an interesting idea, but I don't think it makes sense in this particular context. Like I expected world building to happen. I expected kind of like that magical element to be there from the beginning. And it's precisely because this is supposed to be placed within a larger context of a story about witches.
Which one did you watch first, Ben?
I watched the 2018 one first.
Yeah, me too.
That's interesting. I watched the Argento one first, which I do not recommend. I'm not the first person to say this. I've seen other reviews that were like, hey, if you haven't seen Argento's, watch the new one first and then go back and watch the original. Because doing it out of order just seemed, you almost instinctively want to give the 2018 film a much superior rating just because it fits your 2018/2019 mindset, the way you view films, comparatively, I should say. Anyway, I will say that the 2018 version had problems. I mean, first, Tilda Swinton played too many fucking characters in this movie. God damn,
Really?
was that? Yes, that was so distracting. Playing Joseph Klemperer especially. I didn't mind her playing Helena Marcos because I couldn't tell it was Helena Marcos. But Joseph Klemperer, I mean, look, makeup looked okay. I was a little weird. I could tell something was off. I couldn't tell if the guy had been like a burn victim at first. He just looked a little weird. But then when he talked, he sounded like a 16-year-old like girl. Like I was like, we're going to talk about narrative. We're going to talk about world building. We're going to talk about like investment. And I felt like that was lazy. Like, why do that? Not only that, I read that Tilda Swinton actually asked for a penis, like a prosthetic penis to be put on her when she was playing Klemperer, which, I mean, I get it. Like method acting, you want to be in it, but
surprised me at all. That does not surprise me even slightly. I
just couldn't do it. It took me out of the setting. I was like, I don't know. Whatever. It just like, why? Like I asked why? Just get another actor. Like why did you need to do that with that? I think there was at least 3 characters she played in this.
So I'll agree and disagree. I'll agree that if they were gonna do that, they should have made something out of it. Like the Joseph character should have. There should have been some sort of plot reason why these two were played by the same actor. Because when you double actors, it's usually because you're trying to draw a parallel between these two, unless of course it's a comedy and Eddie Murphy just wants to do everything.
Just really quickly, which this film did in the mother of Susie Bannion, who also played Death at the end. That is an example of what this film did good, but we'll get into that later. So I just want to throw that in there.
So yeah, I mean that makes sense, and that's sort of a plot-based reason for cast doubling. In in the 2018 version, there's no. I agree that there's no reason for that. I still liked Tilda Swinton's old man though. Like if I would watch a movie that was Tilda Swinton's old man and Tilda Swinton as the dance instructor, I would watch those two separate movies. But combining them into one, I was not. I was waiting for there to be a reason, and when there wasn't, I was disappointed. But I like the Tilda. She's one of the most interesting actors working today. She is she's always willing to do some crazy shit, and I like her. I like her as an actress, and so I liked seeing multiple Tildas in the 2018 Suspiria.
One could say a Matilda of multiple tildes. There was an uncanny valley effect for me for her playing Joseph Klemper. I couldn't. I teach their own.
It didn't hit me that way, but that doesn't mean that I wasn't. That I just was waiting for there to be another shoe dropping, and the fact that there wasn't was disappointing. What were some of your other problems with it?
The other one that was kind of a big thing for me was I put in my notes, I got the Jack Torrance vibe from Susie Bannion. And what I mean by that was I got the vibe that something was off immediately. Like I didn't know the story of the new one, right? The obvious twist in the new one is that she's Mother Susperiorum. But sort of early on, not even from watching the trailer or anything like that, I just felt like there was something wrong. Like, at the end when Madame LeBlanc, when Tilda Swinton says during the last scene or something where death comes right before, where she says, something's wrong, like something's off. Don't you all feel it? Something's off. I'm like, yes, I felt it like an hour and a half ago. Like I felt like something was amiss. I was like, she's too good at dancing. She's way too intense for a novice. She's giving like 150% in every day. Like there's something weird, something off. So I mean, I guess you could consider, if you were any other person, maybe you could consider that an interesting part of the movie. But I felt at the very end, once I was like, oh, that's it. That's it. She's Mother Susperiorum. I don't like having that feeling. I would have never guessed she was Mother Susperiorum, but I knew something was there. She just had that Jack Torrance vibe, that Jack Nicholson crazy eye, fucking this guy's going to kill his family. I can already tell that sort of shit from the very beginning. And I didn't like, if I can catch that, I've said this is what I've said about M. Night Shyamalan movies. If I can catch the twist, you fucked up, because I'm an idiot. And I don't catch things very easily. And if I can catch something's off, you did something wrong. So
I must be more of an idiot than you, because I totally didn't catch it. Like the ending that I was expecting to see was more akin to the one that we saw in 1977, where you have this face-off against Susie and Helena Marcus. But I definitely didn't see where they took it. So yeah, I guess I'm just like a complete and utter moron.
Well, no, I totally agree. So I had no idea where they were going to take it either. Like if I would have guessed where they were going to take it, shit, I'd be like, well, I'm a genius. How did I had no idea where they were going to take it, but I guess I had like an intuition that something was off with Susie Bannion. Like there's something that the film's not telling me about Susie Bannion. That's it. Like nothing above that, nothing more specific than that. But even that, I don't like that I got that. Like I felt like that was a mistake on the part of the film. I felt like the film was trying to express that this is a newbie dancer who, I shouldn't say a newbie dancer, a very experienced and talented dancer who's new to the school, who's just making her way to the top kind of quickly, or very quickly. But it just felt more than that. It was like almost too hard of a push, I guess. So I knew something was off, but I didn't know what, right? So yeah, you're not an idiot for not guessing this. I mean, I didn't guess it either, but I just there's something with her eyes. She had that Jack Nicholson, like crazy ass, I'm going to kill my family shit in her eyes. And I'm like, there's something off with her.
Yeah, what's a little bit strange, definitely, in that scene where you have her trying to disagree with Madame Blanc, right? So it's like you come in, you have this aura around her and this masterfulness and this legendary status, and then Susie rolls up and says, well, actually, I think I prefer to be on the floor. And like everyone kind of has that moment of like, what the fuck are you doing? I feel like that's definitely one of those moments where she's pushing just a little bit too hard, and it does seem a little bit out of character, even if she's wearing like the kind of like the main character plot armor, whatever. It definitely goes beyond that and just seems like hubris at one point. Yes. But maybe it is just like a little too much to be believable.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to say that I'm smarter than any buddy. I just have seen so many fucking movies that I know which way the film is pushing me.
Did you get that vibe though?
Yeah, I kind of guessed the twist, but that doesn't mean that I'm smart, and it doesn't mean that the movie's dumb, and it doesn't mean that the movie's good if the twist doesn't get me. It doesn't mean the movie's bad if I guess the twist. It doesn't. It's sort of another way. Like, I got the twist in Us rather quickly, but that didn't diminish my enjoyment of the film. Likewise, I got the sort of twist in this, but that didn't diminish my like the film. I think that, you know, she and Tilda Swinton had a sort of uncanny chemistry in that first dance sequence, and that was what sort of pushed me into understanding kind of where this thing was going. And it worked for me. I think it's a massive improvement over the final girl cliche that the 77 version does. Like, the idea that the main character is more inextricably tied to the witch bullshit in the 2018 version, I think, is a change for the better. It makes the film, it smooths out the plot in the film, and it leaves me with more questions at the end than the 77 version did. But then again, I mean, as we've discussed multiple times, 77 is about mood, not plot. This is about plot and mood, and it's the 2018 is able to do both things with adroitness, I would say.
So I have a question for you
go
guys. Let the sort of the themes in this film. Let's maybe go down what we can draw from this. So one of the questions I had was Germany, Berlin Wall, Cold War. What was that about? It's a very distinct part of the 2018 film on purpose. Why do you think that is? I mean, I have kind of a theory. Like, I think, and it's a very simple theory. Like, I think that the Berlin Wall is representative of a kind of divide within the house of Mother Markham, within the house of the Dance Academy, I should say. Like, there's a kind of obvious divide in loyalty, in commitment between Madame Nutmother, Madame Marcos, and Madame Blanc. So I saw the wall as kind of a should say representative, I guess, like a way of describing, like a very obvious way of describing divide in commitment, divide in loyalty. What did you guys think of the setting? Like, how the setting played such a role? What do you think it represented for the film?
I think you're right. I like the interpretive framework that you offered there. I wasn't able to, the Berlin Wall, it didn't play as much of a role in my interpretation as it did for yours, though.
Well, like the social unrest, you know, right. there's scenes where they say, "Oh, don't worry about Pat. She's probably joined the anti-fascists and stuff." I mean, there's constant dialogue about the setting. You hear in the background, you hear violence happening. I think there's even a scene where you hear like what am I thinking of? Like a ringing, like an alarm going off. Like it's obviously just a distinct part of the setting, and I felt like it was so thick, it was so obvious that I was wondering what they were trying to hone in on there. Like, they didn't have to do this in 70s Berlin, Cold War Berlin, you know.
True.
So yeah. I was curious what you thought. I that's all I got from it, was just the idea, the very like sophomoric idea of a wall being a divide between people. And yeah.
Imagine that.
Walls divide. Who would have thought?
Do you know wheels are round too? The other idea is that there's a sense of being trapped inside this dance studio, and that this dance studio sort of becomes a force that is keeping these characters in, and perhaps that is another element that the Berlin Wall and the particular setting that this film creates, is this feeling of claustrophobia and the feeling of being unable to escape beyond where you are. I think that's also true of the Joseph character as well.
I was going to say, I think that what you're hitting on, to me, was really the stuff in the film that talked about the Holocaust, which was Joseph Klemperer and his wife. I saw kind of the dance studio as a kind of concentration camp. I mean, there are clear analogs between the two. The mothers, all of them really, in the dance studio are harsh. They're rigid. They're overseers of all the dancers. They kill the dancers at times, right? They torture them. They enslave them. Susie is kind of a picture of a liberator in a lot of ways. And I don't want to. Maybe we could see Susie as a representative of like kind of the U.S. coming in or something. I don't liberating people. And then again, she also kills a bunch of them. So I don't know if that works. But the other thing is that like the term Volk specifically, like the dance in the film, Hitler used that term quite often to refer, like Volk means the people. And so he would refer to that in his speeches whenever he was talking about his party. He would use the term Volk to describe his party in reference to sort of their Nordic superiority, which was obviously purposeful. I think that they chose that in this movie. So there was no need to discuss Joseph Klemperer and his wife and the Holocaust other than like clearly for analog in the movie, I think. So for me, it wasn't so much like the Berlin Wall necessarily. It was really that part of Joseph Klemperer's piece in the movie, understanding what the dance studio was and how it functioned, and kind of the mothers as overseers that kill and enslave their dancers. So yeah, that was how I took it.
Yeah, I mean, like one other layer that might be added onto that. I think that's absolutely fascinating. Mostly, I think I took it as like a really just fantastic setting to sort of contrast, as well as act as an analog, but and kind of like contrast, kind of like the very sort of dreary, dark, just like the weather. You have this environment in which people are choosing to come into. Susie coming from New York into, I guess it's like East Berlin, into this very dangerous area where there's active rebellion and violence and cars exploding, people getting killed in the streets, to come and dance. And that in itself, I think, is sort of interesting and novel. But even the dances themselves, I think, sort of express sort of, as much as they're about power in this movie, express a kind of sort of despair almost. I mean, just like the movement themselves. If I were to watch these sort of like ballets, I guess, that they're putting on in their shows, I think they're very indicative of the kind of like the feeling and the atmosphere and the setting around the movie, right? So if like the dance studio training mansion, whatever it's supposed to be the backdrop for the story that we're watching, I think that particular period in Germany is supposed to be the backdrop for which the characters are sort of like watching things unfold and interpreting their own feelings. But I do think it's quite fascinating to sort of have like just as kind of like an overtone, the thought of people coming together to do this very expressive sort of artistic human activity in the midst of utter destruction. And I think that also kind of like says something else. I don't necessarily know if that was like a choice on purpose. Obviously the original story, maybe the director thought of this, maybe not. But it is just sort of like an interesting little facet to think about.
Maybe they feed on it.
Kind of like, yeah, like sort of like coming up through the rubble, almost like a very, this is the destruction, dance is how we show our resilience kind of thing.
Well, but it's interesting. So let's look at it this way though, Ben, like maybe, so you got me thinking because, at the very beginning, Susie, we see flashbacks of her when she's young, pointing to Berlin, like where they're trying to study the United States, and she has Berlin circled on the map. Everything comes back to Berlin. And you think that the school is based there, and this is a place where a lot of violence is going on, and there's dance in the middle of it. There's almost a cathartic, artsy sort of what am I trying to think of? Like an embrace of it, like in the midst of the violence. There's a dance in the midst of all the violence. And if we think to one of the last things Mother Suspiriorum, Susie, says to Joseph Klemperer as he's on his deathbed before she takes his memory, is that something to the effect that like we need guilt and shame, right? And she's talking about the school. She's not. This isn't like a metaphorical thing. I don't think. I think she's being literal. She's saying we need this, right? But we don't need yours. And she takes his memory. So I think they feed off of, the witches feed off of, at least in the Mother Suspiriorum era, guilt and shame. But maybe prior to that, violence. Maybe prior to that, unrest. Incivility, something like that. Maybe this is something they feed off of. That just really got me thinking that, especially knowing that Susie comes from a Mennonite background where dance is prohibited, you know, and her mother says, we see the flashback with her mother at the end, that one of her mother's biggest sins was bringing her daughter into the world or something like that, like spreading her daughter as though she were a disease. There's something like that. There's something she says like that. It's very interesting that, I know, just got me thinking, like, narratively, maybe the witches feed on these sorts of things. I had nothing else to add. I just found that, like, when you said that, interesting. Sort of her origin as a dancer, going to Berlin, this place of unrest and violence, and then at the end saying, you know, we need guilt and shame. I don't know. Maybe they, yeah.
That does kind of work as it relates to the politics of Germany and the culture of Germany post World War II, where there's a great deal of, we're remembering how fucked up we were during the 40s, and the guilt and shame is part of German culture post World War II. So I think there's a lot in that final scene, both as it relates to tying up the loose ends of the plot, and also metaphorically as it relates to German culture at the time, and currently still.
Sort of like expunging themselves of Nazism. Is that what you mean? Like, kind of.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But there's also a sense of German accountability, that Germans believe that they need to be held, that they are accountable for the atrocities of that time, and that uh, there's a great deal of regret and in German culture as it relates to the 40s and Nazi Germany and whatnot.
Interesting. We got a comment that I thought was really interesting, from Byron, who said, I thought the mother's twist at the end of Suspiria was very Old Testament, New Testament, in that Mother Susperiorum felt like an Old Testament Virgin Mary coming, getting biblical on her followers who have strayed from the path. That's a very interesting way to look at the ending. I loved the ending of Suspiria. That was my favorite part of the 2018 version. I know a lot of people didn't, but I really liked it. One of the things I didn't like was the color. Oddly enough, like, that's so ironic. Like, we started this podcast by going, oh, the original is all about color. It's only color. Who needs Technicolor, right? But at the end, it was almost too much the opposite way. And I think it was probably because of the violence. I don't know if they were trying to skirt an NC-17 rating or something, because heads were exploding and there was blood everywhere. But I didn't like the sort of frames, like the way it was framed, and the color just seemed very weird, off kilter. But other than that, I like sort of the story component with sort of death coming and the sort of a recompense for sin. And it was really not even for sin, just for choosing someone else who who eventually was not going to be in power. And I like the idea that the actress that played Death, the personification of death, to whom Mother Susperiorum summoned, was the actress who played Dakota Johnson's mom in the movie. There's like, I wanted to pick your brains on why they would do that. They didn't need to do that. It's very interesting. Like, and you really don't know they do that until you see the credits. And it might be a reach to sort of think about the idea of, like, obviously that the analog would be something like a mother brings a daughter into the world, but at the end there's this like reversal where it's the same mother destroying the world and killing other people. It's a really just an odd decision to make cinematically, and from a filmmaking perspective, which I don't know how much we want to reach into this, but I just thought it was strange that the actress that played the mom, who brought, say, Mother Susperiorum onto the world, the vessel for Mother Susperiorum, became the thing that became the personification of death for the witches. Really odd to me.
I think that goes back to the heart of the confusion I think that I had about how it ended, just generally speaking. So maybe there was a plot point that I missed, and perhaps you guys can jump in if that's the case. But so there's a lot of build up about Susie's character and about her history, and it's very integral to the movie. And it is quite interesting that the personification of death ends up being her mother, as we're interpreting this, right? Like the same actress, I think. But how does Mother Susperiorum come into this, right? I don't remember it being explained if Susie was supposed to be a vessel for this. I From the overarching story about the three mothers, I got the feeling that this was all three of them were supposed to be kind of like these ancient beings that existed for a while now. So like I'm a little bit confused about that. Like how did Mother Susperiorum and Susie become essentially the same being here? Perhaps I missed that part.
No,
But
and when, like
well, right,
that's something
right.
the film never answers. I'm right there with you. It's one of the criticisms I have in my notes is you never really see the clear line when that happened. Did it happen in the beginning? Did it happen when we see the flashbacks with her? Did it happen somewhere in the dance studio? You never really see it. All you really know is by the end she becomes Mother Superiorum, or has been, who knows. And when she opens her heart, it's almost, or her chest rather, it's almost like a I'm empty. Like there's a blackness, a void. I'm here. Like it's almost like I'm fully not Susie Banyan anymore. I'm this darkness, this blackness. I don't know. It's kind of an emptying of self, which goes back to dancing, which goes back to the idea of dancing, of being integral to being a piece of the art form, emptying yourself, right? So there's this sort of this is dancing around this entire movie. No pun intended. Dancing around the entire movie. This dancing around the entire movie of emptying yourself.
I mean, my interpretation was that the dance was a ritualistic dance that brought Mother Superiorum into Dakota Johnson. That was my interpretation of it.
The reason I don't think that happened, Jim, is the actual dance in front of the audience is stopped because Susie Banyan's character does her own thing. So at that, like, she fucks it up. So
sure, right.
So at that point, the fact that she fucked it up means, I think, that Suspiriorum is there at that point. So it's before the big thing at the end. So that's right. So that would have been great if they would have. That would have been clear, right? Like, you're talking about a way that this film might have been a little better, as if that would have happened at the end. That would have been the twist. But the film wants you to believe this happened prior, in more ways than just that. But
yeah, that's actually, I mean, that's my criticism of the film too, that some of the plot elements of this film, like some of the connective tissue of the plot, is missing from this film. Or maybe I just need, I don't necessarily want a filmmaker to hold my hand through the entire plot of the film, but sometimes I do. And that's when I give my final thoughts, it's going to be some of the plot elements didn't fully work for me, and some of the plot elements didn't fully connect with me. And I think we're hitting at one of the elements that I thought I had an answer to, and maybe I guess I don't. But at the same time, if we're going to give Suspiria 77 license because it's able to create mood and style and forego plot, then we should offer the same olive branch to 2018 a little bit. That is a film that also is not holding our hand through things. Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I think I want to make a distinction here. It's one thing if you're trying to build a plot and then you just leave holes in the plot and fuck up the plot that you're trying to build. It's another to forego plot for a more sort of abstract, artistic, experimental, mood building, almost like visual painting art type of film. If you're intentionally letting that stuff go, that's one thing, but I think it's just a mistake. I think it's a flaw. And whenever you are trying to build a plot, and then you just don't have elements that line up correctly. You know what I mean? I mean, it's not something that's necessary, but if that's what you're trying to do, then you need to do it correctly. And in this particular case, I do agree with what Noah's talking about the emptying of the dance. I'm pretty sure through most of this film that they're trying to make Susie a vessel for Marcus. And that's kind of like what the ending is all about, except that something else ends up being in the vessel. I mean, like that's the best way that I can think about this, because I don't think the flashbacks are there just as like filler. Like, I really do think that there was this person that walked into the dance studio, and then by the end of the movie, she's someone totally different. And perhaps that is sort of like an incarnation thing. Perhaps it's supposed to be interpreted as an evolution, but they were emptying her out to be a vessel for someone else, and then something happened that they didn't expect. And yeah, that's just like the confusing part to me, is that like it just sort of happens and there's no reason why. Like there's no indication that the spirit of Suspirior is still sort of in the building. Although at one point, like you do see kind of like this scene where it's like, I think an early flash of that incarnation of death. Like you see something and you think maybe this is Marcus, but it turns out not to be her.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, that's like the only tie-in that I can think, is that maybe that incarnation of death is actually supposed to be some type of indication that Suspiriora, or yeah, Mother Suspiriorum, is like there in some form, just waiting for her opportunity to jump in and fuck things up. You know, I don't know. Yeah.
This is not Hereditary, essentially, is what we're saying.
Yeah.
That this is that there are some problems with the world building. I do like one of the comments that we had, where there was a tied to biblical allegory, and this is from Byron. He writes, to go biblical again, I assumed she was born an incarnation of the witch, like Christ is of God. That's an interesting reading of it, and I kind of like that. So maybe that's a way to sort of, you know, smooth out the plot elements of the film. But you're right, Ben. At the end of the day, the question is whether or not this plot holds together and works for you as a viewer, and parts of it didn't for me.
We need to, yeah. So Susie's going to the Old Testament, New Testament thing. Susie's a liberator. Like Mother Suspiriorum is a liberator. She's there to clean house, right? It's very, that's a very Old Testament, New Testament, I think, which is interesting. Obviously, there's some brutality. There's brutality in the Old Testament. Yeah, let's not get into this. This is going to be a little too connected for me. It's going to get me off into my religious rant. But one of the last few things I have in my notes that I kind of wanted to talk about was the idea of, and this is super quick, but really just the idea of dancing as spells. Like I like to think of, especially in this movie, the idea of dancing and the effect that it has as like jazz. That's how I saw the dance in Suspiria 2018. When they say the space in between the movements, the space it creates, it's like how you hear that tired phrase that jazz is about the notes you don't hear. It's almost like it's the unseen scene, which I thought was kind of, that was unique to me and very novel. I would be interested to know of any other films, horror films or not, I mean, it's definitely going to be horror films, that have the idea of dance creating an adverse effect in the way that Suspiria did, that it demonstrably causes worldly harm to other people. Like one of the things we haven't talked about is that scene with Olga. We skirted it a little bit, but that is a fucking brutal scene, and that messed me up. That was visceral and horrifying, and that's what made this movie a horror film, like at the start to me. Like that was unbelievable. You get this little thing where Madame LeBlanc, like you can almost see a little glow, a little glimmer when she touches Susie Banion's hands and her feet. And she weaponizes dance. She weaponizes. It's almost like the to the extent to which the skill we see in Susie Banion, it's reflected in the violence and the hatred or the anger that the witches have at Olga for running out on them. Very interesting and absolutely terrifying concept. It was unbelievably brutal. Consequently, I went to YouTube and watched the behind the scenes version of how they built that. It's wild. You should check out how they did it. It was like a ton of work to create a scene like that. Even worse, that Olga doesn't die at the end. Did you guys catch that? She's still there at the end, and she asks for death. That was like super fucked up. Anyway, I'm going all over the place, but like, goddamn, that was like,
Thank you for drawing our attention to that, because that was something I was going to bring up as well, is how brutal some of those scenes are. And it's all about, like, dance is about well, to some degree, contortion of your body or moving your body in sometimes unnatural ways. And this takes that, the death scenes in this film take that to the extreme by contorting their bodies in absolutely unnatural ways in order to torture them to death, essentially, or torture them not to death. And that was, I thought it was a brilliant way of melding the supernatural elements of this film with the artistic elements of the film. So in that sense, I think it works perfectly, both thematically and cinematically. because I agree with you. Those were absolutely horrifying scenes.
You guys have any other trains of thought you want to go down before we rate the movies? Because I guess we're gonna rate both of them. So
yeah, I want to talk about the cinematography in the Guadagnino film as well. I think that the camera is relatively stagnant when it needs to be, but it moves when it needs to be. And Guadagnino is fantastic at creating these brilliant and arresting images. I think that this is one of those one perfect shot, that Twitter account where they just take one perfect shot from still frames from films and display them. I think, tweet them out. I think this is one of those films that has quite a few one perfect shots in them. I'm thinking of the dance sequences. I'm thinking of the horrific contortion sequences. I think all of those work very well. And even Dakota Johnson has got this face that's able to be kind of a blank canvas in some cases, where you can kind of read your own emotions onto it. And I think Guadagnino uses her perfectly. I think she's an underrated actress. So in terms of the cinematography and the filmmaking and the acting, I think there's a lot to commend in the 2018 version as well.
she's like, her face is like Kristen Stewart done correctly. You know what I mean? Like there's something like you can use it.
That's
you know,
perfect. That's perfect. She's Kristen Stewart done correctly. Although Kristen Stewart's given like one or two good performances in her career. But yes, I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah, Ben and I were talking about seeing A24. I think Ben already saw it. I was going to, but I didn't. Robert Pattinson, the other dude from Twilight. Yeah, the guy who he gets shit from being in that movie, just like her. The High Life, the A24 film, which is going to be something that I'm going to see probably this week. I was going to see it last night, but I didn't have time. So,
I'm looking forward to that too.
Yeah, if it's good, we may do a review of it. Yeah. Anyway,
yeah.
While we're on the
Twilight, also kick, good in a film a couple of years ago called Good Time. Actually, I think it was 2017. Great film. So okay. Yeah, I'm ready to wrap up if you guys are.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, did I select this? I don't remember who selected this, but I'll start. So between the two films, 77, I want to be careful in how I rate it, just because I know that I'm coming into it with a huge 40 years of Monday morning quarterbacking, right? I have a very different set of eyes than Italian giallo cinema. That's not my thing. It's never been my thing. It will never be my thing. It is about experiment and art and sound and just the technicolor saturation of atmosphere, and it's entirely stylistic. But to me, that was distracting, and I can't help but feel it was distracting. I just can't help it. The music was shocking when there was nothing happening. That was strange. There's a purposeful disregard of logic in place of atmosphere, which if the balance was, instead of like this, if it was a little more like this, I'd probably give it a higher rating. So I want to give the 77 Argento piece. This is going to be controversial, I think, because it's a very nostalgic film for a lot of people. I'm probably going to give it a 4 out of 10. Didn't scare me. I didn't find it very interesting. It just wasn't cohesive. The pieces that I liked were very minimal. It was really just some of the atmosphere was kind of cool. It was, I expect to be even a little scared in a movie about witches and about mystery. It just felt over the top, which I guess it was supposed to be. And it was just so over the top that it didn't sit with me in any way. That was like the only film I think we've done that was less scary to me was The Lobster. I'll put it that way. We did The fucking Lobster, and that was probably the only movie that had a lower rating. So I'm sorry. I'm just not that cultured or that classy. I'm not. I can't do artsy art house films, and that's not me. I'm sorry. I'm very left brained. And if that's a part of me and it's not you, I apologize if that's just didn't do it for me. Suspiria 2018, like we said, had like the score wasn't as bombastic as 77. It was grounded in reality in a little more. The world building was better compared to the atmospheric and stylistic 77 version. There were muted colors, which I thought, for the reasons that we talked about in this podcast, were just a better, did more for me, oddly enough, than the Technicolor fucking giant, the sort of rainbow that is the 77 Argento piece. But I felt like the 2018 version was more of a thematic recreation. It had a different story, but it was an homage. It felt similar to 77 in just the right amount of ways. You know what I mean? It had a similar feeling in a lot of ways, but I think it built the world a little better. And I like the fact that the remake focused more on the power dynamics of the school. There was something more logical, more left-brained there. So I kind of dug that. So yeah, I would probably give the 2018 film. I was going to score it a little lower, but after talking about it, I kind of want to score it a little higher. I mean, I would give the 2018 a 6 out of 10. I can't give it more than a 6 out of 10, to be honest with you. There is a very specific set of things that scare me, as we've talked about in this podcast. It's different for Jim. It's different for Ben. It's different for all the other co-hosts. Like, we have different concepts that scare us. This didn't have that, despite having a personification of death in the film, which the Seventh Seal did that 1,000 times better without blowing up heads. Sometimes having a conversation about finality can be scarier than saying, "Hey, you didn't vote the right way. Your head comes off." Can't give it any higher than that. But that's just me. Didn't hit my apparatus. Even 2018 was a fairly artsy movie, and that's just typically not my thing. But I get it if it's your thing. So I'm gonna give it that score, which I think is one of my lowest reviews for either films. For both of those films, some of my lowest reviews I've given on any film in this podcast. So those are my thoughts.
Your lowest is a 1.5 for The Lobster.
The Lobster. Nothing will go lower than that. Jonah, I hope you're watching, because this was your movie.
And Suspiria 77. 2 is your second lowest, although you've got some 2.5s running around there.
Got it. I don't feel too bad.
I'm on a 5 scale, so I transfer all of it. I divide everything you say by 2.
Totally fine. So
I guess now that I'm talking, I'll go. I'm gonna repeat a lot of the things my co-host said about the logic associated with the 77 version. Yes, it is all about mood. Yes, it is experimental, but that doesn't mean that it's got license to that just because it's experimental doesn't give it license to be bad. And so there's a lot that didn't work for me about the 77 version. I do respect that Argento was able to do a lot with a little, with just colored lights and people thrashing around in barbed wire like an Ed Wood octopus. But at the end of the day, it was a 1.5 out of 5 for me. It is not a recommendation. I didn't enjoy the Argento version. Whereas the Guadagnino version I quite enjoyed. Mainly, I think it smooths out some of the story elements, although, as we've talked about, the story still needs a little bit of work here and there. There are elements of the plot that aren't particularly connected. There are even some characters that perhaps don't even need to be there. But as a whole, when you look at the cinematography and the acting and the dance sequences, a lot of that worked for me. So in a way, I'm kind of giving it more technical points than I am giving it plot points. So for that reason, I am at a 3.5 out of 5 for the 2018 version. What do you think, Ben? Close us out.
All right. It's kind of interesting, relatively speaking. Yeah, the older one I'm definitely not a fan of. Like, I really do enjoy the artistic, artsy stuff more than Noah. I would say, especially. I have no problem with that. I really just think they kind of they went for that and sort of botched it. So again, as we've kind of talked about already, maybe it's an experimental film, but the experiment just sort of failed as a whole. That being said, I could definitely see this movie sort of being picked apart by future films, right? And like I don't necessarily have any particular examples of this, but being an earlier film where they've done some interesting things and they tried some stuff, I'm sure it could be scavenged and probably homaged in a number of other horror films down the line. You know, some of the stuff was fairly interesting, but it really just did feel like a slasher film to me that was trying to be kind of like creative. Yeah, I mean, like the geometry was really interesting, the colors were cool. The music totally failed, and I felt bored by it, honestly. So if I were to, and this is all, of course, like the 77 version, right? Just to be very clear about this. And so for that one, I would say like out of, yeah, I guess I'm gonna have to give it a 2 out of 5, and like I really feel like that's still pretty high for what it is, and the reason that I'm giving it that high of a score is because there are particular like elements that I do find really interesting about the film. I just don't like the overall composition. It's discordant. It's an orchestra where there are sour notes in several sections. You know, I mean, it's just there are really great parts, but it just doesn't come together that well. Conversely, I think the 2018 version is quite well put together. I really do enjoy the fact that they use violence and dance, and the climactic scene is highlights among an otherwise sort of like dreary, gray, sort of desperate kind of backdrop. I do enjoy the fact that there are kind of like multiple sort of stories happening all at once that sort of converge across their common elements. That's always kind of an interesting thing. It doesn't always seem chronological. Obviously, there's a lot of flashback going on, and I think that's done quite well in this particular example of a movie. Overall score, I mean, just I really have to score it the way that I'm scoring it, just because it didn't necessarily speak to a fear that I have, and that's going to be really important for me to get the score higher than like a 7 out of 10 or a 3.5 out of 5. Like you need to have all the technical elements there. You need to check all of the boxes to get to about that level. But to get above that point, you need to be able to speak to some sort of like particular theme of fear that I resonate with, and that just didn't do that. So while I think the film has incredibly high technical merits, the fact that it didn't scare me at all leaves me to rate the 2018 a 3.5 out of 5.
So it's interesting. Our top two commenters, Byron and Alex, we're all kind of on the same page. So Alex gives a 77 version a 5.5 out of 10. And then the 2018 version, a 5 out of 10. Okay, so that's surprising. I would have figured so he's the only one who gave the latter one less than the original. And then Byron gave 77 4 out of 10, and then the later one 8 out of 10. So it's interesting. Like the theme has been that the later film is superior, which clearly, if you're watching this a year from now and we have more dislikes than likes, fuck you. We don't necessarily equate nostalgia to cinematic quality. Sorry. So join us next week. We are doing Annihilation next Sunday night at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We are going to talk about the human capacity for self-destruction and how, at least I'm going to go into that, about how that is. I just blew the whole movie for you. You know what? Don't even watch it. I'm just at the human capacity.
Watch it. It's amazing. It's fucking amazing. It is the best film of the year. Yeah. I love that movie. Watch the hell out of it. Watch it 50 times.
Yeah. Look, if you made it through the 77 Argento film to comment on this podcast, for God's sake, watch Annihilation. So we're doing that next week. So check us out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I think the week after that, oh God, we're doing Martyrs, which I'm not looking forward to, as I've said, week after week. I'm just going to get to Martyrs, and I'm going to score it right at the very beginning. I'm going to angrily score Martyrs as part of my intro. And then after that, I'm not sure what we're doing, probably Raw. I need to think of the new film schedule. As always, we're coming towards the end of our film list, and we always select another 5 movies. If you have any recommendations, please not any Italian giallo films, please let us know on our social media. Leave a comment on this video if there's any that you think we should get into, that you think would be good, some that we haven't done already. And anyway, we will see you guys next week at 6 p.m. for Annihilation. Take it easy.